Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, May 1st, 2022. Happy May. Today we're going to be talking about Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party on the national level and what this new poll from ABC News and the Washington Post has found that it might surprise us to some of their findings, looking at it comparing to other polls and other numbers from the Washington Post from just months before. Now, the Washington Post is a reputable pollster on FiveThirtyEight. They have a pretty good rating when it comes down to actual numbers. They have an A+ rating. Now, ABC News, the Washington Post, has been off on certain occasions. Back in 2020, they said that Joe Biden was going to win Wisconsin by 17 points. A week before the election, he ended up winning by less than a point. So sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. If you take a look closer at the ratings here, they've called the races about 74% of the time. And they pretty much do the best methodology that FiveThirtyEight seems to compare, and overall it gets about an A+ rated poll. If you take a look at their numbers in comparison to where they were right and wrong, the biggest difference being the state of Wisconsin, they got states such as Virginia, absolutely correct. They got Florida, correct, right? They got, Michigan, they got Pennsylvania, in some of these closer races, which were within the margin of error, as described by the poll. So generally, I would like to trust polls that have higher ratings on FiveThirtyEight, but we find an interesting number that comes out of ABC News today that shows the Democratic Party with a 1-point advantage over the Republican Party. And I know this is completely different from everything else that we've heard from me, from the mainstream media, from polling firms, because the consensus has been very clear for the past couple of months that the Republican Party has a lead nationwide, and that lead probably is larger than the polls are letting on. Now, I look at this and say, this is probably an outlier, but if we start to see similar trends following, it very well obviously wouldn't be. Looking at the poll too, I think it also is something to be said that the ABC News Washington Post poll shows a significant change compared to the previous poll. The Washington Post, and in this poll, isn't a consistent outlier. They have very much been setting the narrative and setting the polling industry down to this level of that the Republican Party is up, and any other poll that shows otherwise is probably an outlier, probably wrong, as has been described by YouGov, The Economist, Morning Consult, and Politico. These polls individually are often looked down upon because they show the Democratic Party ahead by 1 point or 3 points nationwide, when in reality the Republican Party is more than likely up, and that's what the polls on the average reflect. But now, for the first time in months now, there is a poll from a non-firm besides YouGov, The Economist, besides Morning Consult, Politico, that is showing the Democratic Party ahead. And it's a narrow lead, and I wouldn't exactly say it's anything that should be celebrated by the Democratic Party, but it does indicate that there is some type of cultural shift, at least nationwide, between backing the GOP and backing the Democratic Party. Now, the average, according to Real Clear Politics, is a bit larger for the GOP, but again, take a look at these numbers and you will see that this is the first poll in quite some time. You actually scroll down and you will find that the only numbers that show the Democratic Party ahead are, again, the same exact pollsters: Economist, YouGov, and Politico, Morning Consult. You see this time and time again. It may seem like it's going back and forth, but in reality, these are just the same two polls that are consistently off on the margin, which is why when you actually capture in the most recent polls that have done data and analysis, you find that they are really alone in that circumstance until you get to this brand new one from ABC News Washington Post, which is quite surprising. Because even if you go back in time, you take a look at the ABC News Washington Post poll from February, you will see that the Republican Party is ahead. The Republicans lead by 7. Right here is the poll from February 20th through February 24th. It shows the Republican Party at 49 and the Democrats at 42. In fact, this was a larger lead than what the average of the polls had been letting on. The GOP was ahead by 7 points nationwide. They did another poll immediately following Glenn Youngkin's election to the state of Virginia. That was a very big race, and it was showing that the nation and states that were previously characterized as blue states were turning on the Democratic Party in a way that was pretty substantial. I mean, you're talking about a 12-point shift in the state of Virginia. So looking at the national numbers, it wasn't too much of a surprise to see that the ABC News Washington Post poll had the Republicans ahead by 10. But you're looking at these numbers and you're saying, on one hand, in the past, someone could have made the argument that the ABC News Washington Post poll was overestimating the Republican Party, but now it seems to be overestimating the Democratic Party. But that doesn't come without a reason. There is no real reason as to why the ABC News poll should have shifted 8 points from February unless their respondents shifted in terms of their overall beliefs. Now, this is not the exact same type of group, according to my knowledge, unless it completely is. It looks like it's a difference here in the regular vote count, but overall, I mean, what we're looking at is a very big difference from where it was back in February. It might not be the same people, but generally their methodology is highly regarded, highly esteemed, and they've pretty much been accurate every poll leading up to this one. And not to say that they are inaccurate, just they aren't matching the average. But then again, it is the most recent poll. I find it quite interesting, to say the least, that they find the Democratic Party even ahead by a fraction of a margin. I think after we've seen the Republican Party take that lead following November, following Glenn Youngkin's election to the state of Virginia, it has pretty much been here for the past, 5, going on to 6 months, now that we're hitting May. It's a position where the Republican Party is good nationwide, but to see a number from the Washington Post that shows the Democratic Party ahead was quite surprising to me. They also sort of combine this with the fact that Joe Biden's approval rating is slightly higher than where it was. Back in November, his approval rating was 41. Today it's 42. The last time it was hovering around here was September 2021. So you're talking about before, Glenn Youngkin won, before you started to see major rises in gas prices, in, inflation, and the whole, debacle here with Russia and Ukraine. A lot of things were going on. This was right immediately following the Afghanistan removal, which is what led to the approval rating dipping below 50%. But what you're finding is that the approval rating seems to be up about 5 points relative to the last poll. And that could very well be attributed to the fact that the Democratic Party is doing better. Republicans were up by 7, and now that Biden's doing 5 points better, Republicans are down by 1. It makes a little bit of sense, but it is still a bit difficult to wrap your head around. Now, the disapproval rating is 52%, so Joe Biden is still down about 10 points nationwide. The Washington Post previously had him down about 18 points. That doesn't always match up with the national average. Again, an argument could have been made in the past that it overestimates Republican support. If you're taking a look at that February number to see exactly, during this time frame, Biden was down about 12 points. 18 points was a bit of an overestimation, but now they seem to be right on track with what the average is saying. Biden down 10. The national numbers show Biden down 10 on average as well, and they're looking at the generic ballot, and while that's very different, again, it does explain a little bit about why we are in this position where the Democrats might be up potentially by 1 percentage point. Now, looking at the way that the economy is viewed, the American public actually seems to trust the Republican Party with a lot more on the economy. You take a look at this on who people actually trust more in terms of equal treatment of groups, Democrats, right? Equal treatment of racial and ethnic groups, Democrats. Education, Democrats. Abortion, Democrats. And here's where it flips. Republicans lead in everything else. The immigration, the economy, inflation, crime. These are 4 things that the GOP has really been trying to hone in on. And another thing that they're trying to hone in on is education and schools. Luckily for Democrats, they hold on to that one, but it looks like they're starting to lose the culture war. They're starting to lose the race for the lead in some of these very key issues. Before, someone might have said, when, we saw the Biden boom following his inauguration, and whether that was a return to, people opening back up, whatever it might be, at the end of the day, he did see some major economic growth in the beginning of his term. Looking at that, immigration might have looked better for the Democratic Party. Inflation might have been a non-issue at that point in time. Crime might have been a non-issue at that point in time. Immigration, also, Biden has never really been approved of too heavily on the issue of immigration, so honestly, I'm surprised that it's not as large of a lead for the GOP, so that number really doesn't even, come across as surprising, at least in the sense that the GOP is ahead. But what I'm finding here is that while the Republican Party maintains some leads on some of these issues, it's very clear that people still care about the other issues, thus can explain why there's a 1-point lead for the Democrats nationwide. Should the Republican Party, should the Supreme Court, one of the same when it comes down to nomination and actual composition of the court, but looking at it, should the court throw out Roe v. Wade, abortion will be a mainstream issue for 2022, and the Democratic Party will benefit. If Roe v. Wade is thrown out, I can guarantee you, mark my words, that will be what turns the tide of the midterms in favor of the Democratic Party. You do not touch that Supreme Court case. You do not set a new precedent, because what happens is the 55 to 60% of the nation that is pro-choice turns on you. I understand there are voters out there that are pro-choice and voted for Trump, but you have never seen a threat to abortion access and rights now ever before. There were circumstances where it could have happened, and they failed. But the ideological composition of the Supreme Court is much more conservative now, with the recent nomination and confirmations of Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, with a 6-3 advantage on the court. Abortion access is going to be potentially limited. And that, I think, is a very, very big issue that the GOP cannot beat the Democratic Party on. This nation will never be a pro-life nation again, and that's why the GOP doesn't touch this topic in terms of mainstream arguments. You don't see Donald Trump going out there campaigning on the main thing that he's pro-life. He mentions it to appease his base and because he knows that's what the Republican Party wants, and politicians know that full and well. But that's not something that would convince any left-leaning independent or any Democrat to vote for you. What would convince you is exactly what the GOP is up in right now: the economy, inflation, crime, immigration. Those are the perfect talking points, and they're trying to get into education. But once you touch abortion, I can guarantee you there's a reason why voters are still backing the Democrats, even to some extent, not just in the Washington Post poll, but there's a reason why Democrats are only down 2 points when Biden is down by 10. For reference, in 2010, when Obama was down by 5, Republicans were up by 10, right? You're seeing an 8-point difference here in the negative for the GOP, whereas in 2010, a 5-point positive. There is a reason for that, because of issues such as this. And I'm glad the Washington Post poll decided to cover it and ask voters how much they actually care about this and where they actually stand on certain issues, because it provides a lot of context and about where people actually trust, different groups to actually lead. Now, it says here Republicans lose their lead on the generic congressional ballot. I would like to say that, again, I think this poll is an indicator of something. I just don't know what yet. It could be a start of Democrats taking the lead in the generic congressional ballot, or it could also be potentially an outlier that also still provides a bit of context as to why this individual group decided to go into the Democratic Party after previous groups went for the Republicans by 10, by 7, now down by 1. From November 2021, this is an 11-point shift. What explains it? Well, we're getting into that, and we have been getting into that for quite some time now. So for 2022, I would also like to say, should this poll be 100% accurate, should the Republicans lose the national numbers by 1 point, the House still goes to the GOP. Take a look at this map. The Democratic Party, while having some, good advantages in some of these states, doesn't have enough. I would also like to say that the Democratic Party lost some major states that they thought they were going to be able to either maintain the status quo or advance. For instance, New York. You take a look at that state thrown out by a Democratic court. Florida, a Republican court there, not much likely for the Democratic Party there. Not much at all. Looking like it's going to be 4 reduced seats. You take a look at New Hampshire. Democrats are not making advancements there. In Kansas, it really depends, right? California, they lost a seat. They shored up their incumbents, but they lost one. They never really made many major advancements. They lost seats in Arizona. They lost ground in Georgia. The only real wins for the Democratic Party are North Carolina, which will be thrown out 2 years' time from now, Illinois, which looks like it's solid for the next 10 years, Oregon, which looks like it's solid for the next 10 years. Beyond that, the Democrats either just maintain the status quo, which on one end is good for them because it shored up some of their seats, but it doesn't mean that they are going to make advancements. And if they win the national popular vote by just 1 point, I can guarantee you they're out. The House goes to the GOP. All they need is 5 seats, and they will absolutely get that. You take a look at the House history, and you find that in 2016, guess what the margin of victory was for the GOP in the national numbers? 2016, it was 1 point. Let's see if we can find the settings here. Let's see if we can see the popular vote hidden. 1 point. The GOP won 241 seats to the Democratic Party's 194. 2014 was a much more brutal year. GOP won by 5 points nationwide. 2010, GOP won by 7 points nationwide. Democrats would be lucky if you didn't see potentially a 4 to 5 point victory for the GOP nationwide, considering where we are right now. But even if that Washington Post poll was correct, the House is gone and the Senate probably is too. But I will like to say that I say this all the time. One poll is not the gold standard, but I do think it does provide some level of indication of change in public sentiment. This is an A+ rated poll. This is the only A+ rated pollster that has done a generic ballot poll in months now, the last one being themselves back in February. What I see here is the Republican Party potentially losing ground because of issues such as immigration, education, and potentially the unwillingness of voters that I've always mentioned, and I don't think potentially, I think very likely, the unwillingness of voters to back the GOP on a heavy level. There is a reason why Biden is running about 8 points worse than Democrats are nationwide, at least in terms of overall net average and support. I think once we get closer and closer to the election, you will start to see them get closer together. Whether that means Biden gets more popular or Republicans end up expanding their leads, who knows? It could be both. That's something that happened with Obama back in 2010. But we have to wait and see. This ABC News poll definitely came as a shock when it came across my screen, showing the Democrats up by 1 point. I want to wait for more numbers to come out, but for right now, I will say that there definitely is something to explore there, and the GOP seems to have lost significant ground when it comes down to the February poll versus now, and the question remains and continues sort of just why this actually occurs. So no end screen today. I wanted to just say thank you guys so much for watching this video. I wanted to say today I will be releasing potentially later tonight or tomorrow my Senate election video, just a prediction and update. From here on out, we're going to be doing them starting every 2 weeks leading into the election, just because we are starting to see primaries occur and nominees solidify. Ohio confirms on Tuesday, I believe. So we're getting very close to the eventual deadline for the primaries and a lot of these candidates. So I'm super excited, but that also means we need to start increasing the outcome and the releasing of some of these election updates, because a lot is going to change very, very quickly depending on who these nominees are going to be. And I'm quite excited to say the least. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all hopefully later today.